Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us grow to midlife, we try to discover how we can continue on the course of having our dreams and goals realized. But as we're out there in the tumultuous world, realizing that sometimes days bring us disappointment, we can find ourselves discouraged. It is estimated that we think somewhere between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And interestingly enough, it's the negative ones that we tend to hear the loudest. But if you can find a way to use a set of daily simple questions, we can stop them the instant they pop up to sabotage us. It's a simple practice as brushing your teeth, and it will work for just about anyone if you apply it. Our guest today will be discussing why we reveal the nature of a negative thought robs its power over us, and why most of our negative thoughts don't even belong to us in the first place. Why negative thoughts are so comforting, and more. She's a meditation teacher, at life coach, and mindfulness meditation teacher and certified life coach. Her newest book is Says Who: How One Simple Question Can Change the Way You Think Forever. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Ora Nadrich. Ora, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, that's a very unique name.
It is kind of unique, isn't it?
It is. Ora, I don't think I've seen that one before.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual. I mean, I remember feeling as a little girl I wanted to have the name that everybody else had, but I didn't. And now that I am an adult and grown into my name, I'm thrilled to have it. It means light and gold. And I was told, I don't know, several years ago, someone told me it means a prayer in Latin. So I'll take that.
Well, I think a lot of people could use prayers this day and age. It seems challenging, and to, find yourself at a place where you can banish or at least challenge negative thinking to a point that you can actually get your mind to serve you is certainly an exercise in and of itself. How did you come to go in this direction with your life?
Well, my story began long ago, really what I call my original Says Who moment, although I didn't know it at the time, and that was that when I was just a little bit, almost 15 years old, my sister had a nervous breakdown, and it was just devastating. And I am the youngest of four, and I was just completely traumatized by it. I worshipped and idolized my sister. She was this beautiful, magnificent spirit, and one minute she seemed perfectly normal, and then at one minute she was not. And her breakdown was just, as I said, it was just completely devastating for the entire family. But I went into a deep fear state. I went into, what's known as a fight-or-flight state. And when we go into fight or flight, we feel very threatened. We feel that our survival is at risk. And we tell ourselves all sorts of things when we're scared. And what came up for me at the time was that I was going to go crazy like she went crazy. That thought came out of nowhere. Nobody told me that. There was no proof of that. As I said, I was a young woman, teenager really, and it was a thought that just came up on its own. And that thought took hold in my mind for a very long time. And what started to happen for me, which I talk about in Says Who, is that when we are not connected to a thought that is, very powerful and has taken hold in our minds, and what we can do sometimes is bury it in our subconscious, which is what happened to me, and I call that the storage room for all of our experiences, our memories, and our beliefs. It took hold there, and what I was starting to feel were the symptoms, or what I like to call the side effects of a thought that you're not connected to. And so I started to get very intense anxiety, and I didn't know why. And it was by my going on a very deep psychospiritual journey. I know this is a very long answer, but this is really the original moment of Says Who. Took me on a journey because I wanted to understand the workings of the mind better, and I wanted to understand why I was feeling this constant anxiety, but I didn't know what it was connected to. And it was years later that I was able to come face to face with what I call this boogeyman thought, this fear-based thought, and that to find out that it wasn't true, that it was completely fabricated by my own mind out of fear. So that was really that's my personal story. and how I came to know this method that I created in this book, Says Who.
Now, what is it with us as we get older that we tend to follow that direction of our thinking versus when we're children?
Well, when we're children, actually, we're very open, we're very in the moment, we're very present, and it's not until we encounter that first negative thought that really, I believe, is introduced to us. It's something that someone says to us, that we're not okay, and we're not good enough, and we're not smart enough, and we're not pretty enough, and all the things are athletic enough that are told to us, and we take those thoughts on as true, just like I took on that thought as true, and there was no proof of that being true. And we carry it into adulthood, and we don't even know it, and it becomes very familiar to us. And people ask me all the time, well, why do people even want to be negative? You'd think they wouldn't want to be. I don't think that negativity serves anything positive, and it doesn't serve our well-being, and yet we will hold on to those thoughts because they're so familiar, and they become habits for us. Do you know? And it's more familiar to hold on to something that well, even if it causes you unhappiness, than to think of the possibility of replacing it with something that could be so much better for you. But you're afraid to do that. You're afraid to take that risk, and that's why I introduced the Says Who method.
No, it's really interesting. Probably about 5+ years ago, I started becoming interested in advertising, especially in the field of subliminal persuasion. Now, people out there might think, well, you'll hear some people may say, well, scientifically they prove subliminal persuasion just doesn't work. There's the old flash the popcorn, on the movie screen, and all of a sudden you're motivated to go buy popcorn. But as I began to really read and research this and look deeper into it, I realized, this really works a lot more than people believe it does. I mean, it does. Think about it. Advertising is used to create an anxiety that causes you to go out and take an action that will help you relieve that anxiety. Now, somebody would say, well, I'm not so sure I'm influenced that heavily, and I'd say, well, you obviously are smoking cigarettes, so what compelled you to do that?
Right, exactly.
Now, think about that particular thing. I can't think of anybody, first of all, who had their first cigarette and enjoyed it. In fact, I can't think of anybody who immediately started enjoying cigarettes even after the second, third, or their first pack. How do you get up to a full pack of cigarettes a day? Do you really carry that much anxiety in you? But what really compelled you to start that habit? The next thing is, you've got the fast food restaurants that are out there. You don't really pull into those places because you're hungry. Think of the stress of driving.
Right.
Think of all the billboards that you drive by that show you a lifestyle that maybe you're not living up to, or the way that your neighbor lives, that compare yourself to the Joneses. And you're going to try to tell me that somehow science has proved that subliminal persuasion doesn't work?
I so agree with you, Daniel. I really do. I think that's a really good point to bring up. I do talk about, I think another way to describe that is what's auto-hypnotic. I mean, I think, you put yourself in a position of being vulnerable or very open, if you will. You go into a movie theater and you say, okay, well, I'm going to be taken on this journey or this ride for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And if it's, let's say, very violent, or very, a really scary movie, that does seep into your psyche. Where do we think that goes? It influences us. We get influenced. And what's really most important to recognize, which is why this book is really trying to have people be aware of their own thoughts. Our minds are so powerful. We tell ourselves all sorts of things, and then we believe it. So that does go into your subconscious, for sure.
Now, it's really fascinating, too, to understand how the mind works, and you talk quite a bit about that in Says Who, and that is that you get into a habit of thinking. And it's mainly, as I understand it, because the mind uses so much energy, or the brain, if you will, for body functions, it tries to see how quickly it can turn something as automatically as possible, so therefore it can go about doing everything else that it needs to do.
Right.
And it's pretty interesting when you think about how often, that people may think about failure. So they don't want to get out there and step into the void, into an area that is new or unknown to them. And that's sometimes where their richest gifts are. So talk about how you would go about getting someone to find themselves in a position where their thinking literally has enough emotional charge that leads them into a direction they really don't want to go?
Well, I really want to start with the basics, and I go into that and says who that I want people to start to become the observer of their thoughts. And how you do that is that you really put yourself in a position so that when the first thought comes up, that you can, that you start to sense is going in that direction of negativity or fear. Some people will say, well, but it happened so fast, the next thing I know, I'm taken over by this thought. Well, that's what we want to get to. We want to get to it so that you don't get taken over by this thought that, by the way, you're creating in your thinking mind. People separate themselves out from their own thinking mind, and you wonder, well, where do you think those 40 to 70,000 thoughts? That's an approximation of how many thoughts are going in and out of our minds daily, and that we know that a great percentage of them don't always serve our well-being, and they're negative or they're fear-based. So I want to teach people how to know the difference so that when that thought comes up, even if it's a thought that you think about a lot, I'm not good at this, I'm not going to be successful, I'm going to fail, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to not be good at a relationship. All the different things that we tell ourselves daily, I'll never be successful at anything. There's the garden variety of negative things that people tell ourselves that we could all relate to, but everybody has their own inner critic. Everybody has that own inner critic voice that they tell themselves whatever they tell themselves. And what I want to propose is how to, again, be the observer so that when that thought comes in your mind, you can go, okay, there's that thought that wants to pull me down, that wants to really just bring me down and make me feel bad about myself, make me feel that I'm inferior and I'm less than. And this becomes a habit. It's building mind strength so that when you start to build this muscle, you really catch those negative thoughts quicker and you're able to stop them in their tracks, literally. So I introduced that as the very beginning of trying to teach yourself how to be the observer. And if you give it a go, you'll see that you start to become much more aware of when those negative thoughts start to come up. And that's really the beginning of this process. And then you can go into the questioning, which is the 7 Says Who questions that I've created.
So essentially then for our listeners is for them to be clear that a lot of time that this is actually learned behavior?
Yes. Learned behavior. They become habits. These become habits of ours. Think back to childhood. So many of the habits that we have today, we didn't have as children. A lot of people that I work with, when, one of the Says Who questions is, have I heard someone say this thought before? Because so many of the thoughts that we hold on to and that we believe are true started in childhood, and many of those thoughts were even said to us by someone else. So as I said earlier, so that becomes a habitual way of thinking. And, you want to wake up to that. You want to be mindful of it. You want to be really aware of the thoughts that you're telling yourself, which is why the observer is so essential in beginning this process of sort of being your own gatekeeper. Oh, no, that thought's not going to sneak by so quickly this time. I'm going to be really quick at catching it. It's like waking up your senses. That's really what I'm encouraging people to do, to become more mindful. Mindfulness is being in the present moment with total awareness. The moment that you're in right now, like the moment you and I are having. We're having this conversation. If you said something to me and I said something back to you, we're going to be aware of what each of us is saying to one another. So I want you to take that same awareness and have that with yourself so that if a thought comes up, you're really onto it. You're really aware of it. So that you can catch it and say, that's not a very positive thought. Why am I entertaining that thought? Why am I allowing that to occupy my mind? Why am I allowing that to make me feel so horrible? You have a say in the matter. You're creating these thoughts.
Now, would it be reasonable to say that, for the most part, that people tend to be in a state of hypnosis?
I love that you're bringing all this up, Daniel, because I think it's so important, and I think maybe for some people, I don't know, there are going to be all different kinds of listeners. Some people, they want it to be explained very clearly and succinctly. For other people,
that's what books are for.
That's right. That's what books are for. Things might sound too esoteric or metaphysical, but hypnosis is really powerful because, used what you talked about with, and I'm talking about auto-hypnotic states that we go into, or trances or whatever. I like to really simplify this and say it's like being asleep. It's like you're half awake. you're not fully awake, or what we like to say, you're not really there. You're kind of there, but you're not really fully there. You're kind of present, but you're not really fully present. Well, where are you if you're not 100% in the moment? Where are you if you're not really 100% awake to what's being introduced to you? So that, like you brought up cigarettes, if something is offered up to you, whether it's in a commercial or someone's trying to convince you to take something or try something, you can take that moment and go, do I really want to do this? Or do I believe this? Or does this really resonate for me? Or does this even seem true or real? You take that breath, take that beat, take that moment to be able to know what kind of relationship you want to have, be it with a thought or taking something into your body, absorbing something, ingesting something, believing a thought that doesn't belong to you. You are as I say in my book, you are the creator and master of your inner dialogue, which creates your reality.
I think, too, for our listeners out there, there are two arenas that I believe would be very powerful for people to explore what we're talking about here today, because I think it dredges up the most: relationships and money.
Right.
And I know that you talk about in your book that there was a particular person who had actually taken on her father's belief about, we're going to end up in the poorhouse. Or you've heard things such as, what do you think, money grows on trees?
Right.
And you think of the drudgery something like that puts into you. You feel the emotional impact of your parents or your dad, whoever it may be, making this sound like a bad thing. It's just not enjoyable. It's drudgery. That's the first thing. And the last thing as a child you want to see probably is your parents to be not feeling so good. And then secondly, that idea of the belief of, for instance, what do you think, money grows on trees? This is hard work. You got to go out and look for it, and it's not easy. Well, there's no fun in that either. And I'm remembering this scene from the hit television show Dallas.
Right.
And it was funny because as I was exploring some of these concepts years ago, I was actually watching this, and there was a scene where, I'm trying to remember what her name was, but she was the young one, the young blonde girl, and I can't remember her name.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she's living on, and she's dating this guy who's a doctor, and it seemed to him that everything in her life just kind of came easy. She really didn't have to work for it. But what he said was so profound at that moment that I began really paying attention more in life, and that is, I was always of the belief that you had to work really hard to get nice things. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting that you were raised with that belief? I wonder what his childhood must have been like, even though he's a fictional character. But how often we go about believing these things to be the gospel.
Absolutely. And, really what's so incredible about that, I hear this with a lot of new moms, that they'll say, oh my God, I said this to my child, and I thought, I've become my mother, because my mother used to say that to me. We go on automatic, and so if you can catch it, which is really what the Says Who method helps you do, is it helps you catch it, to be able to discern between what is real and what is not, what belongs to you and what does not belong to you. But if you think about it, so much, we all grew up hearing things, certainly in our home, and how powerful it was, and how it affected us, and how it influenced us. And it wasn't just the voices in our home, it's the voices in school, it's the voices, wherever we go. It could be, in our churches, in our temples, in our country clubs, it can be on our schoolyards, it can be everywhere that we are influenced. And, you want to know that those beliefs are really organic and true to you, not just that you've taken on someone else's belief because you felt that it was accurate because it was at the time an authority figure or it was a parent. It doesn't mean you have to disrespect someone else's belief, but you can really discern between what belongs to you and what belongs to someone else and have those delineated boundaries.
I think one of the most fun ways, and it's kind of aligned with what you talk about here in your book, Says Who, is I remember the movie Rodney Dangerfield, Back to School. And here's his son, he goes up to the college to visit his son, and he all of a sudden decides, because his son was about to quit college, well, hey, why don't we do this together? And he says, what are you talking about? He says, well, I'm going to come to school with you. And he goes, you're crazy. And he says, so who wrote the rules? And I think that would be a good one to challenge your thoughts. But let's talk about the 7 key questions that a person listening today can begin to use, and how this process really works. And now, it is simple, but it takes work to become a habit like anything else. But let's go ahead and start there.
It does, Daniel. I'm glad you said that, because like anything else, it's like the more you commit to it, the more it will commit to you. You want to get in good shape, it's just not going to come flying through the window. You want to take the steps to get yourself in shape. Well, this is the same thing. These questions are very simple. They're very logical, as you'll come to see. But the more you do them, and I want them to become second nature for you, write them on a little Post-it, put it on your mirror, put it in your wallet, and you'll learn them by heart, and you'll find yourself that they will come up for you very quickly when a negative or fear-based thought happens. So the first question is, says who? And I begin with that because by asking yourself that question, says who, what you're really saying in essence is, who is saying this thought in my mind? So it's like you're taking that first step towards an inquiry, an investigation of this thought, this negative thought, and you want to get to the bottom of it. And it's also what I call in the book taking ownership, because when you say, I am saying this thought in my mind, you're being honest with yourself. And that's very important, not to deny it, not to deflect it, not to push it away or push it down, but to say, I'm aware of this thought, and I am saying it to myself. The second question is, have I heard someone say this thought before? As I mentioned earlier, we think, as I said, thousands and thousands of thoughts a day and are influenced by other people. And a lot of the thoughts that we carry over from childhood into adulthood, what we've been talking about, is ideas, opinions, and behavior from another person that we've taken on is real. So it's very important to ask yourself that question, because I've worked with many people, like what you mentioned about in my book, this client that I had, which was really an important one, and that's when I first used Says Who on somebody, was this client that I had that felt she had this real deep-seated fear that she was going to end up homeless, which was really out of left field because she was actually a very creative person that was about to start a new business. So we worked together and did the Says Who method, and she realized that that was the thought that her father used to have when she was growing up. And because money was scarce at times and he lost a few jobs, well, she grew up petrified. So that became her belief later on in her adult life. And whenever she was being proactive and stepping towards her own success, that thought would come up, and it wasn't even her original thought. It belonged to her father. Very important to find out who your thoughts belong to. The third question is, do I like this thought? So straightforward, so simple. You really ask yourself a question like, do I like this thought? Well, if you're thinking a negative thought that's making you feel really crummy about yourself, really bad, undermining you, making you feel all sorts of things, how could you like that thought? I mean,
right.
It's like, hello, these are very logical questions. It's
now, here's something I wanted to go right on this moment right here, right now, what you're talking about, Ora, is that we somehow grew up, I think a lot of us, and the word, you're being selfish when you decided you wanted the bigger cookie or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And I think that's the source of that somehow we learned that going after what we want sometimes, or, as a child, and we didn't share, so you're being selfish. That's a bad thing, but you've got to be selfish and have what you want before you can give anybody anything else.
Right, exactly. And you're made to feel bad or shamed. And so you can feel, again, you can carry that over into adulthood, where because you want something and you want to go after something, you're going to undermine it or diminish it by something that reminds you of what was told to you years ago, that it's bad to want to be successful, or it's bad to want the bigger cookie or whatever. So do I like this thought? I worked with a client, and they were on a real, what I call being on the hamster wheel of like just on this jag, where they were obsessing over this negative thought. And I stopped her and I said, can I ask you a question? And she said, okay. And I asked her this question, do you like that thought? Well, that stopped her in her tracks. And again, this is what these questions, as simple as they sound, they will stop your thought process. And she looked at me and her eyes widened, and she said, no, I don't like this thought at all. As a matter of fact, I hate it. So I said, okay, well, just be with that for a minute. So you're really holding on to this thought so tightly, and it's got such, so much energy for you, and you hate it. Why would you continue to think a thought that you not only don't like, but that you hate? So that brings us to then our fourth question, which is, does this thought make me feel better? And similarly to, do you like this thought, how can a negative thought make you feel better? If you can really answer that question, if you can write down on a piece of paper all the ways your negative thought makes you feel better, then you must really enjoy feeling bad.
Exactly. Sort of like, for instance, I remember many years ago when we were growing up, one of the places we liked to go camping was Shasta Lake.
Oh, yeah.
Northern California.
Uh-huh.
And I'll never forget this time. We're out on this cove and we're swimming, and the sun's getting ready to kind of be on its way down, so it's going into the evening. It's still warm out, but you're swimming in the water, and you realize that if I get out of this water right now, it's going to be really cold. And so you kind of find yourself as a kid sitting in there as though you're going to will this water to get warmer. And I remember that I finally decided, I'm going to get out and hit that towel. I'm going to be cold for a moment, but I'm going to get dry and I'm going to be warm soon enough because this isn't doing me any good. And I'll never forget that one of my brothers was still in the water, and he's just sitting there shivering like crazy, and I'm thinking, but that's exactly how a lot of times our negative thoughts are. We find comfort in something that seems familiar. Would that be an accurate way to look at this?
Absolutely, and what you said is really good. I like that example a lot, because when I tell people about positive thoughts, they help us problem solve. And what you described, like you were freezing in the water, but by telling ourselves what we can do, even if it's going to be a moment of discomfort or transition, that's positive reinforcement. Well, if I get out now, even if I run out of the water, I'm going to get in that warm towel. It's going to make me feel good. It's going to make me feel better than this freezing cold water feels right now. So when you start to let those positive thoughts help you, they're really good for problem solving. I say they're out waiting in the wings, just waiting for us to summons them forward to be the star of our movie. It's like we just let these positive thoughts come up. They will help us out of a situation. They'll help us problem solve. And that's a really good example of what you just gave us. Because, somebody could be complaining. That's why a lot of the times, just looking at the glass as half empty. Well, how is that helping you? It's not helping you problem solve. It's not helping you get to that towel that can make you feel warmer. Do you know? So then, Daniel, it brings us to the fifth question, does this thought work for me? Well, again, those three questions in a row, do I like this thought? Does this thought make me feel better? And then now, does this thought work for me? How does a negative thought work for you? How does it work for you favorably? How does it make your life better? How does it make your relationships better? How does it make your work better? How does it make you standing in line at the bank or at the market, anywhere, being on a trip, driving in a car and being angry? And, what is that thought doing for you? How is it working for you favorably? I'd like people to ask themselves that. Very logical. The sixth question is, am I in control of this thought? Now, that's an important question because I get a lot of people who will say, God, I feel so taken over. My thought has so much power over me. I feel so out of control. I feel so vulnerable to my thought. Okay, I get that, and I know that's how it feels, and it feels very real. I have felt it myself. That means you've given that thought way too much power, and that means you have forgotten who's in the driver's seat, and you've forgotten who's really in charge here. That is you, because I say there's not some little person that crawls inside your head and starts to, blow all these thoughts in your head. It's you. You're the person that's coming up with these thoughts. You're the person that's allowing them to stay there. You're also the person that can decide that you don't want that thought to have power over you. And I also introduced something in the book which is called Release and Replace, and that means that if you let go of a negative thought that isn't serving you, your well-being, and isn't making you feel better, you can replace it with a thought that does. The seventh question, which is the final question, which is, do I want to keep this thought or let it go? Well, when you've answered all those 6 prior questions, unless your thought is your original thought and you like it and it makes you feel better and it works for you and you feel like you're in control of it, I would say keep it. But if you can't answer any of those thoughts in a positive way, then I would think it's time for you to say to yourself, I am so ready to let that thought go.
certainly get yourself empowered to go in a different direction just to see how that one's going to turn up.
That's right, because then you're saying, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready. I'm ready to let this thought go. And people might go, well, what does that mean? Like, let it go. Where does it go? You're making a decision to know that if or when that thought tries to sneak back in through the back door of your mind, which it will, this isn't a quick fix. It's not sticking a Band-Aid over something, that you will catch it. I say negative thoughts are like trespassers. If a trespasser came onto your property, what are you going to say? Oh, hey, come on in. Help yourself to whatever you want. No, you'd say, get off my property. You don't belong here. And that's how I want you to view those negative thoughts. They're imposters. They don't belong there. And you can tell them to leave.
Now, I'm curious, Ora, with all the years of experience that you have working with people in this arena here, why is doing this so, I guess, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, how is it that it works or it's so effective at kind of stopping or extinguishing? You don't eliminate negative thoughts. You're going to have them, but you really get into a process as you begin observing and challenging these things. You discover they have less and less power because you're not allowing the emotional charge, because that's where we really take our action is, through the emotional charge of a thought. So how is it that observing and asking these questions sort of just dissipates, extinguishes that energy?
Well, again, bringing up the word habit, it becomes a new way of thinking, which I believe is the original way, the real way of how we come into the world and how we are as children, naturally happy and playful, and we are kind of invincible as children. We believe that we can do all sorts of amazing things. We started as those people, so we have to come to remember that about ourselves. It's like going back home again to our original thinking mind, and it's creating a new habit. It's creating a healthy habit of thinking. And when you start to do this, once you introduce a concept to your mind, it takes hold. It's like it opens up a whole new way of seeing something. It alters your perception in a way that's expansive. They're doing all these studies today about, the benefits of positive thinking and how it affects your health. And there's so many scientific studies that are being done today. So if you can get into the habit where this becomes really familiar to you and you begin as the observer and you begin to challenge and question those negative thoughts, you're going to start to see them dissipate. And if or when a negative thought rears its head again, which it will, I'm not going to mislead anybody and say this isn't about thinking positive, 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 and positive thoughts will just continue happening for the rest of your life. They will get more positive, and you will be able to know what to do when a negative thought comes up that wants to go south in your mind. You will get very agile and very versed at knowing how to handle that so that you, again, are in the driver's seat. And the more you do it, I've worked with clients which is really incredible. Like, I work with people who will say, God, I'm such a negative Ned or a negative Nancy. I'm a pretty negative person, and I grew up in a really negative home, and my dad was negative, and it's just like, or my mom was negative, or, negativity has been a really big part of my life. Very honest to admit that. And by the way, do it without any judgment and criticism, because this is counterproductive to this work. It's like you want to go, I'm on board to understand my thoughts better, and I'm on board to change them and transform them so they can work for me in the most optimum way possible. So what I see with clients, they'll say to me, I started to do the says who questions, I started to implement being an observer, I started to do the release and replace that you talk about in your book, and you know what? I am feeling less negative. I found that I had less negative thoughts, and they started to diminish. And I also got really good at catching them and turning them around. And it becomes this whole new way of thinking. And people start to really like it, and they want to do more of it, and they want to integrate it into their lives daily.
I had the opportunity to talk with one of the people who were involved in the creation of the movie The Secret.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a really interesting conversation, and he came to agree also that he felt, that there was a lot of value in what was produced there, but he says it seemed that it focused too much on money. And I said, but the fact is it was an interesting movie when you look deeper into it, instead of that idea that you can kind of sit around and intend at things, and if you wait long enough and you're persistent enough, it's just going to show up whether you take action or not, it seems. But the fact is we're talking about something here that takes action, but the reality too is that as you begin cleaning that up a lot more, where you're challenging these thoughts that, as we've been talking about here today, and you figure 40, 70,000 of these things, that's like people trying to get into Woodstock for free, which many of them did. But they just keep rushing that fence until the fence just doesn't even matter anymore. But if you could just pay attention, in the course of a single day, as you're just going about your business, whether you're going to the supermarket, you're driving, whatever it is, and you realize these things will onslaught you, that they will just come in droves. But the thing is,
they will.
As you begin doing the kind of work that you're talking about here today in your book Says Who, is that you'll start seeing it become less and less, and pretty soon you find yourself almost empty-mindedness, which is what meditation has been talking about for years. Get that monkey out of there, and if you're going to have some chatter, get the kind of chatter that serves you.
Absolutely. I have a chapter in the book called The Something to Worry About Thoughts. It's like, worry and fear, there's constructive concern that you can have, and I go into a meditation, like, what does worry really do? It makes you more anxious, and even if you're worried about somebody else, you might want to turn that into a meditation where you can say a prayer or do a visualization where you're wishing them wellness or see them surrounded by a white light, and that if it's a health concern, that, worrying doesn't help if it's just this ongoing anxious worrying. There's a way to turn these thoughts into productive thoughts so that they work for you, and if you want to send it out to someone else, that it's going to work favorably for someone else. These are habits. It's a skill set. It's like a toolkit. Do you know? You want to go repair something, you got your toolkit. You're going to use the screwdriver for this and the wrench for that. Well, I want you to look at these questions in the same way. And that one thing I also want to say about, thinking positive thoughts all the time, and, you have to have thoughts that support your goals, your desires, and your dreams. We all can say, yeah, I want to be rich, and I want to have this, and I want to do this, and I want to go here, and I want to own whatever it is, whatever your wish list is. But if your thoughts can't support your goals, dreams, and desires, you will not realize them. You see, it has to be consistent. You can want to be successful, but if somewhere deep down inside yourself you don't feel deserving of it, that's the thought that will rear its head. That's the thought that will diminish the very thing that you want. And this will give you tools. It will give you an exercise. It will give you a discipline. It's discipline for the mind so that you can direct your thoughts to support what it is that you want to realize and actualize in your life.
So then it is true, isn't it, Ora, that what we think we become?
I believe that. And, if you want to start and take these steps, you start daily. You start daily so that you can welcome your thoughts. I even do a Says Who meditation where I say, close your eyes and, bring forward a thought, whatever that thought is. Now, for somebody, it could be a thought that they see themselves, under a waterfall with a rainbow across the sky. Have more of those thoughts because they're beautiful. For someone else, it could be an immediate fear or negative thought. And try and hold that thought, without judging it, without criticizing it, but that you're really inviting that thought up so that you can transform that thought to be something that really does work for you, something that is beautiful, something that is of the divine, so that it can really be the food, the soul food that you deserve. And our thoughts can do that. I say we're the composers, we're the architects, we are the designers. We can make our thoughts be whatever we want them to be. So start with one thought at a time, and if that negative thought tries to sneak in there, you'll know what to do. You're boss. You're the boss. You're the boss of your mind. It's not the boss of you.
Well, the other thing that I find unique, too, about a negative thought is they seem to scream louder than the rest of them.
Because they're trying to get our attention.
Right.
You see, they are trying to get our attention, but I believe our thoughts want us to know what they're trying to tell us. And that's why stuffing down a thought or pushing it away or trying to numb yourself, by the way, or anesthetize yourself, which we haven't talked about. A lot of the times people, there's something that weighs heavily on them. And everything you feel, by the way, is connected to a thought. Emotions are connected to a thought. Feelings and beliefs are connected to a thought. And sometimes it can be very scary to bring, as I said in the meditation, bring that thought up. You can transform it, you can heal it, you can change it, so that you can really take charge of your life, do you know? And this becomes the practice, this becomes the discipline.
Very exciting stuff. The book is Says Who. Our guest today, Ora Nadrich, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program to figure out how we can get those 40 to 70,000 thoughts down to just a couple and make them really good positive reinforcements. Now, you know, I remember, Ora, as I was kind of in that realm of questioning my belief in whether I can be successful in certain endeavors or not, is I started an interesting practice where you think about people that you might have a lot of esteem or respect for out of the world and through history. You know, it could be Leonardo da Vinci, or it could be, as I mentioned earlier about the show Dallas, Larry Hagman.
Right.
And read biographies, excuse me. And it's interesting how a lot of times people, if they haven't engaged in a business for themselves, becoming self-employed, realizing whatever their dreams are, that they, as you were saying, don't feel deserving of success, or that it's a linear path, that if you do A, B, C, you'll get to point D. Mm-hmm. But in reading these biographies, you realize these people that have had what are considered highly esteemed success and notoriety had a heck of a lot of suffering going on. Yeah. And I found that when I was able to know that that was true about other people, you realize, well, if they can get through it, so can I to get to where I want to go.
Absolutely, that's so true. And I also think of people that came before us, and if you think of people like Leonardo da Vinci, or you think of Einstein, or you think of, there's so many people, Tesla, Mozart, Chopin, there's so many people that created things that we enjoy today. And what I want to say about that is, yes, they suffered, but also keep in mind that began with a single thought. They held a thought in their mind's eye, and from there it grew into a reality. Before, you think of great composers, before it became the symphony that we hear today, they heard it in their mind before they, sat down and played it on the piano and created notes out of it. So we are extraordinary. We are so magnificent, so powerful. I say the mind is like a Lear jet, but you want to be a good pilot to fly that thing. So you have that ability. It's so empowering to know that about ourselves, but to know that yes, people suffered, and we can relate to that, but they also transcended that suffering because they believed so much in this idea that they held in their mind's eye, and then they wanted to share it with the world. Share what you hold in your mind's eye with others. I'm sure there's so many people walking around that have these amazing ideas and these visions that they hold quietly and silently to themselves, and might sabotage it by saying, yeah, but nobody's gonna like that, or they're not going to think it's so great. I just want to share, I don't know how much more time we have, but I remember listening to somebody who was really a talented musician, and they played an original song that they composed, and I said, oh my God, you are so talented. It's amazing. You should this is your calling. And they said, yeah, but I'll never be Mozart.
You're right. You won't be, but you'll be you.
That's right. And the you that is you could be, what Mozart was to Mozart as we knew him to be. The you that is you is waiting to happen. So let it happen.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. And I keep remembering, I keep attributing a particular quote to a guest we had on the show, Dr. Bernie Siegel.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was listening to him on a tape series. It was like a love trilogy series. It had Marianne Williamson and all these guys. And I remember he says, just think about this for a moment, that in billions of years of evolution, nobody can screw up quite like you can. And if you could at least step out in your day knowing that, boy, life gets a lot easier, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Ora, is there a website people can find out how to get the book and things like that?
Yes. Well, my website is oranadrich.com, ORANADRICH.com, and the book can be ordered, at all your major book outlets like Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get it in a couple of days. Your local bookstore might carry it. If not, they can maybe order it for you. But going online and getting it that way, and you can also order it on my website.
And I'm sure people could go to YouTube, and you might have a video or two there.
I do. I have a YouTube channel, and I have actually. I'm also. I've got a meditation record, CD, whatever you call it today. It's all on the music outlets as well. It's called Eternal Bliss Meditations, mindfulness meditations that I've got. So please check out that as well. And I also just want to share, I'm very excited that I'm going to be in Costa Rica next February from the 12th to the 18th at a beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous Paradise on Earth wellness retreat called Rhythmia, Rhythmia. So come hang out with me there. It's going to be just paradise. And I'm doing a workshop called Mastering the Mind, Transforming Negative and Fear-Based Thoughts.
Very good. Well, Aura, thank you so much for joining us here on the program and enlightening our listeners.
Thank you for having me so much, Daniel. I really enjoyed it.
Right on. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can discover more also by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the Beyond 50 world and upcoming programs as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.